Welcome back to the deep dive. We are your guides through that fog of information, taking your complex stack of sources, the articles, the briefings, all the analysis, and turning it into focused, actionable insight.
And today, we are diving into an event that was, truly seismic. An overnight operation that executed a targeted, high-speed seizure of a sitting head of state, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife, Cilia Flores.
But the key distinction, and this is everything, the premise this entire operation was built on. It wasn't a regime change. It wasn't an invasion.
No, it was framed very specifically as a targeted apprehension mission. The target wasn't a president. In the U.S. view, he was an indicted fugitive.
That framing really is everything. The stated goal right out of the gate was just immediate and totally uncompromising. Capture these two fugitives and transfer them directly into U.S. custody. No negotiation, no politics.
Just swift, decisive action. And we have to emphasize the venue that U.S. officials kept citing over and over again, the Southern District of New York, the SDNY.
Right. So even if they were, processed in Miami or Florida initially, the prosecution itself was anchored in New York. And that's a huge legal signal, isn't it?
It's a massive signal. It puts the whole thing under the umbrella of federal law enforcement. It says, this isn't war. This is about prosecuting transnational narcotics and terrorism cases. That's the legal scaffolding they built to justify the entire thing.
And the source material we have today is it's extraordinarily rich. We're talking extensive briefings from people who were directly involved. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and political figures like Trump and Rubio.
And that's combined with some really critical outside analysis on the legality, the precedent, the frankly terrifying historical precedent this sets.
Yeah.
It gives us this granular, almost impossibly detailed view of how a superpower decides to do something like this.
So our mission today is to break all of that down. The timeline, the overwhelming military package they used, the specific charges, and of course, the massive geopolitical shockwaves. For you, the listener, this is a deep dive into strategy, into consequence, and into what it actually takes to pull off an operation this complex.
And why it might just haunt international relations for decades to come.
Okay, let's unpack this, and I think we have to start with the planning phase. General Kane was very clear. This was not a rushed decision. This operation was, and I'm quoting, months in the making.
And when you hear months in the making, you have to understand what that actually implies. The sheer depth of commitment, the intelligence gathering required. Kane specifically highlighted unprecedented interagency integration.
But that's the classic alphabet soup of U.S. intelligence, right? But they're usually so siloed.
Exactly. But now you have them working seamlessly for one hyper-specific arrest mission.
Wait, let's stop and really define that for a second. We hear about the CIA, clandestine intelligence, and the NSA, signals intelligence. But what does it actually mean to coordinate the CIA, the NSA, and the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, for a single capture mission inside a military base?
Well, it completely changes the nature of the mission. The CIA is providing the human intelligence, that's, the routes, the daily routines, who's loyal, who isn't. Where exactly is the target inside this compound?
Okay, the on-the-ground picture.
Right. Then the NSA provides the digital picture. That's the SIGINT. They're intercepting communications. Maybe they have encryption keys. They're looking for any indication that the target might be vulnerable at a certain time.
And the NGA, that's the one people forget.
The NGA is the silent partner in modern special ops. It's all geospatial intelligence, mapping, imagery.
Yeah.
And you might think, why is that critical? Because you're not fighting a battle. You're running a sprint against the clock inside a fortress. If the target location really was Fort Tiuna, as outside accounts suggest, and that's a massive military complex south of Caracas, you need perfect high-res imagery. You need precise structural maps.
So like blueprints.
More than that. 3D models showing wall thickness, where the roads go, where the utility conduits are, and most importantly, the exact predetermined landing zones for those helicopters. The NGA provides the visual roadmap that stops the assault force from getting lost or hitting a surprise barrier at 4 in the morning.
So they weren't just gathering data, they were building an operational instruction manual for the commandos. That level of detail, it suggests they were waiting for more than just political approval.
Precisely. Kane kept calling this a watching and waiting period. They were waiting for trigger-based conditions to align perfectly. And one of the most surprising triggers he mentioned was the weather.
The weather. You've got F-22s and Growlers. Why does a little cloud cover matter?
Well, it matters a lot if you're flying a big helicopter assault force at, say, 100 feet above the Caribbean Sea.
Which they were.
Which they were. It's a move designed for maximum stealth. They use an effect analysts call sea clutter, where the radar returns from the waves basically mask the low-flying aircraft. But if you have high winds or rough seas, you get turbulence, which is incredibly dangerous for low-altitude flight. So they were watching the weather constantly through Christmas and New Year's, just waiting for that perfect, quiet, atmospheric window.
And that brings the timeline to life. The moment they got the green light was late. Trump authorized the operation at 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time on January 2nd. That precision, 10:46, it suggests all those triggers, the weather, the intel, the political calculus, had finally, at that exact moment, converged.
And the phrase they recorded, "good luck and Godspeed," I mean, that just amplifies the seriousness of it. But here's the really big structural and legal point we have to hit. U.S. officials are adamant that there was no advance congressional notification.
Which is the textbook definition of bypassing oversight for a massive military action. How on earth did they justify that?
They used two arguments. The first was tactical. They said the mission was trigger-based, it was highly sensitive, and any delay waiting for Congress would risk leaks and compromise the entire operation. Rubio was really vocal on this point. It's a pragmatic argument, for sure. But the second justification is the one that sets this huge international precedent.
Which is?
They framed it not as an act of war against a sovereign nation, but as a high-value federal arrest, which all leans on that legal fiction we mentioned. Was Maduro a fugitive or a head of state?
And the official U.S. stance was crystal clear.
Absolutely. They said he was not Venezuela's legitimate president. They recognized an interim figure. So in their view, the core mission was just a domestic law enforcement action that happened to need a little military support.
And the groundwork for that legal fiction, that was laid years ago, right? Back in 2020 when he was first indicted. This wasn't some sudden move.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the U.S. had already put that massive $50 million reward on his head. That reward money is a critical piece of this. It's psychological warfare, it's legal branding, it screams fugitive, it screams drug cartel leader. It makes the case that he forfeited any protection as a head of state a long, long time ago.
And the charges themselves, announced by Attorney General Pam Bondi, they had to be serious enough to justify this kind of military risk.
And they were extensive. This wasn't just corruption. We're talking terrorism, conspiracy to import massive amounts of cocaine into the U.S., large-scale drug trafficking, and partnering with foreign drug trafficking organizations.
The terrorism charge is the key, isn't it? Legally speaking.
It's the legal hammer. It allows the Department of Justice to claim jurisdiction over things that happen way outside U.S. borders by arguing that the whole enterprise threatens U.S. national security. They even reference Jay Clayton in the context of the SDNY prosecution, which suggests a big focus on the financial crimes aspect of it all, tying it directly back to New York.
So once the legal framework was set, the weather window opened, and the political authorization came through at 10:46 p.m., what was the first real-world sign that the gloves were off?
That's where we move from the chessboard to the military avalanche.
If the planning was about precision, the execution sounds like it was about overwhelming superiority.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The U.S. was clearly committed to making sure this operation was over before Venezuelan forces could even figure out what was happening.
The scale of it is what's just staggering. The reports say aircraft launched from roughly 20 different bases and sea-based positions across the Western Hemisphere. The coordination challenge alone is mind-boggling.
And General Kane's report confirmed that more than 150 aircraft took part. And that's not just, a few helicopters for the assault team. This was a multi-layered package. Bombers, fighters, ISR platforms, an enormous effort for a single arrest.
Okay, let's nerd out on the hardware for a minute because Kane was specific. F-22s, F-35s, F-18s, EA-18s, E-2s, and B-1 bombers. What does that specific combination tell you about their priorities?
It tells you they prioritize three things above all else: air dominance, information dominance, and electronic warfare. The F-22s are your apex predators. Their job is to ensure no Venezuelan fighter jet even thinks about taking off.
Total air superiority.
Total. The F-35s are the quarterbacks. They're multi-role, they're stealthy, they're loaded with sensors. They're acting as the eyes and the brains of the entire strike package. The F-18s are the workhorses, but the specialized aircraft. They're the real key.
Like the EA-18 Growlers.
Exactly. The EA-18 Growlers are mission critical. Their only job is to blind and confuse enemy radar and communications. They're the ones who electronically carve a safe corridor for the helicopters to fly through. And the E-2 aircraft, they're the flying command posts, coordinating all 150 of those assets in real time.
And then you have the heavy metal, the B-1 bombers. I mean, you don't bring B-1s to an arrest mission unless you're trying to make a very profound statement.
You really don't. And they almost certainly weren't there to, drop bombs on Fortuna. But their presence served two immense strategic purposes. First, it's a massive, credible, immediate threat. Just having a B-1 on radar is a paralyzing deterrent for any local commander.
And second.
Second, B-1s can carry huge sensor packages and have powerful electronic warfare suites. They can provide extended ISR and surveillance over a huge area, making sure nothing hostile moves anywhere in the country without being seen. It's the ultimate form of built-in escalation.
But the initial attack wasn't even kinetic, was it? They used something far more layering.
That's right. The first phase involves striking Venezuelan military and security targets, comms, hubs, command and control nodes. But Kane emphasized that the U.S. layered effects using Space Command and Cyber Command before any bombs were dropped or missiles fired.
Okay, wait, walk me through that. Space Command versus Cyber Command in this context. How do they work together to create that paralysis?
They create chaos on two different levels. Space Command is focused on effects from outside the atmosphere. So that means jamming satellite communications, which knocks out their long-distance military coordination. It could also mean blinding or degrading their radar systems by denying them accurate GPS data.
So Space Command takes out the eyes and ears of the entire national defense system.
Pretty much. Then Cyber Command goes for the brain and the nervous system. They're hitting the internal networks. They're injecting code to scramble communications, confuse operators, maybe shut down internal security cameras, and, crucially, interfere with the electric grid.
Which is exactly what happened. The consequence was immediate. Electrical power knocked out across large parts of Caracas, widespread darkness.
And that darkness isn't a side effect. It's a critical part of the strategy. It maximizes surprise, it compounds confusion for any loyalist units on the ground. They're cut off, they're blind, and they can't mount a coordinated defense.
So with the air corridor cleared electronically and the city paralyzed digitally, the path was open for the insertion. And this detail is just incredible. The helicopter assault element flew at roughly 100 feet above the water all the way in.
That is pushing the crews and the airframes to their absolute limits. It's all about using that sea clutter phenomenon to stay hidden from any remaining coastal radar for as long as humanly possible. They're flying into a major military complex. Even a partially working air defense system could tear them apart.
The level of coordination, 150 aircraft, 2 high-level cyber and space attacks, a complex low-altitude insertion, all focused on one compound. It just screams that failure was not an option.
This is where all that meticulous planning smashes into the reality of kinetic action. The clock is ticking from the second they touch down.
And General Kane was clear, this was not a quiet landing. The helicopters came under fire pretty much immediately upon arrival. U.S. forces had to return fire. This wasn't a stealthy snatch and grab, it was a fight.
It was a fight, and yet the risk assessment after the fact is just astonishing. One aircraft was hit, but remained flyable. It completed the mission and got back safely. And most importantly, no American service members were killed. Some non-life-threatening injuries, but that's it. It just speaks to the training, the overwhelming air cover, and the pure speed of the execution.
Speed was everything, especially when you hear Trump's description of Maduro's final moments before capture. He tried to get to a steel-protected refuge, a hardened safe area inside the compound.
He was clearly prepared for a coup, maybe even a conventional invasion. But he wasn't prepared for this. The operational tempo of the U.S. force it beat him. He couldn't get that door secured before they were on him. That handful of seconds was the difference between capture and a prolonged siege.
Trump used this illustrative figure. He said entry could be forced in about 47 seconds. I know that's not like a stopwatch time, but it perfectly captures the mindset.
47 seconds is the goal of operational perfection. It means the team is trained to breach, neutralize threats, ID the target, secure them, and be moving to the extraction point before the shock of the explosion has even fully registered with the guards down the hall.
And the accounts describe it just like that. Maduro and Flores captured alive, restrained, and moved swiftly out of their sleeping quarters and back to the helicopters.
And this brings us right back to that critical legal fiction, the law enforcement role. It couldn't just be special forces.
No, the apprehension force had to have law enforcement officers with them.
This is the legal cornerstone of the entire mission. The sources specified that FBI personnel were embedded with the special operations guys. Their job wasn't to fight, it was to execute the arrest warrant, physically take custody, and maintain that chain of evidence.
It's the ultimate jurisdictional shell game. The military gets you out of the building, but the FBI is the one who puts the cuffs on.
Exactly. And then comes the extraction, which is often even more dangerous than the insertion. They had the prize, but they were taking off from an angry, mobilized military compound.
Kane confirmed they took fire on the way out, too. Multiple self-defense engagements as the force was lifting off. So how does that overhead air support, the F-35s and drones, protect a helicopter in that moment?
They're providing what's called close air support. And that's not just dropping huge bombs. It can be precision machine gun fire. It can be warning shots. The drones are critical here. They're feeding real-time video and targeting data to the fighter pilots, acting as high-altitude spotters, and just smothering any resistance the second it pops up.
It's a digital and kinetic blanket protecting them all the way out. And the timeline, again, is just so precise. The extraction element was confirmed over the water, safely out of Venezuelan airspace at 3:29 a.m. Eastern Time.
So if you track that back to the 10:46 p.m. authorization, the actual on-the-ground kinetic part of this was breathtakingly short. The full operation, from the first cyber strike to extraction, lasted roughly 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Seizing a head of state and exfiltrating the entire force in less than 3 hours, it's incredible. And their destination.
Straight to a U.S. Navy amphibious assault ship waiting in the Caribbean, and then en route to the United States, and ultimately to a federal courtroom in New York.
So the operation's success was, one thing. But managing the political fallout was a completely different beast. The second those helicopters were clear, the whole mission shifted.
It shifted entirely to damage control and trying to manage the political chaos inside Venezuela, which was inevitable.
And the internal reaction sounds like it was immediate disarray. Venezuelan officials denounced it as aggression. They declared a national emergency. A senior official was on TV urging citizens not to cooperate with terrorist enemies.
And an acting leader was reportedly sworn in almost immediately, which just confirms that initial power vacuum. But the public sentiment was described as mixed and muted, which is interesting.
So it wasn't a unified moment of liberation.
Not at all. Some residents were reportedly celebrating, sure, but others were angry or just uncertain and scared about who was now in control. That complicated the U.S. transition plan from minute one.
And that brings us to the core controversy that analysts just pounced on, the legality and the precedent. The operation was immediately called an extraordinary rendition, but on a scale we have never seen before.
That term, extraordinary rendition, is so charged, it immediately brings to mind the post-9/11 counterterrorism playbook, right?
Yeah.
Entering foreign territory without permission to seize a target and bring them back. But what makes this so unprecedented is that the target was a de facto national leader, regardless of whether the U.S. recognized him. It challenges the fundamental principle of sovereignty in the UN Charter.
But the comparison that U.S. officials kept bringing up, and analysts too, was the capture of Manuel Noriega in Panama in 1989.
Noriega is really the only comparable case in modern history. You have a powerful de facto leader, indicted on drug charges in the U.S., and then seized through direct military action. But here's where the analogy gets tricky.
How so?
With Noriega, the U.S. launched a full-scale invasion of Panama. They installed a new regime. It was a war.
And here, the U.S. is claiming it was just a surgical arrest. So doesn't invoking Noriega actually weaken their legal claim? It's like admitting it was a military action against a sovereign entity.
It absolutely muddies the water.
Yeah.
U.S. officials used Noriega to suggest there was a historical path to success here. But analysts immediately pointed out that the UN Charter explicitly prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity of any state. By calling Maduro a fugitive, the U.S. tried to sidestep that entire framework, but the world saw the F-22s and the B-1s. They didn't see the FBI badges.
And the international response was, as you'd expect, fractured right down geopolitical lines.
Completely. You had immediate and very serious alarm from major global bodies. The UN Secretary General was deeply alarmed, warned it set a dangerous precedent. Mexico's president cited direct violations of the UN Charter. Russia's foreign ministry condemned it as unilateral aggression.
Their fear is pretty clear. If the U.S. can use its military to execute a domestic arrest warrant on a foreign leader, where does that doctrine end?
That's the question everyone was asking. But the U.S. did have supporters, especially in the region. Argentina's president, Javier Milei, he welcomed Maduro's removal, framed it as a necessary blow against regional authoritarianism.
That split in South America is really important.
It is. For countries that were deeply opposed to the Maduro regime, the ends justified the means, even if they couldn't publicly endorse the methods. But the broader implication is severe. Adversaries like China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, you can bet they will study every single detail of absolute resolve. It sends a potent signal about U.S. willingness and capability.
the capture was the end of the military problem, but it was just the beginning of the political catastrophe. Trump laid out this. I mean, it was an incredibly ambitious, almost expansive vision for what came next.
It was sweeping. He said the U.S. would run the country until a safe, proper, and judicious transition could be arranged. That's a signal that Washington was taking full responsibility for stabilizing the state and was determined not to let another hostile leader take over.
But there were no details, right? No administrative plan, no timeline. It sounds more like an occupation.
Well, it relies heavily on leverage and the threat of escalation. And that threat was made very explicit. Trump was adamant. The U.S. was not afraid of putting boots on the ground if necessary, specifically to secure critical infrastructure.
And by critical infrastructure, he meant oil facilities.
He meant oil facilities. Venezuela is defined by its massive, if now degraded, oil wealth. If loyalist forces still in command tried to sabotage the oil fields or refineries, the U.S. would have to intervene physically to stop an environmental and economic disaster. That's how an arrest mission morphs into securing global energy assets.
And this leads right into their plan for the oil economy itself. This was supposed to be the mechanism for financing the future government.
It was. The plan was clearly designed to use the promise of future oil money to legitimize a U.S.-backed transition. Officials were stressing that major American oil companies were ready to invest billions of dollars to rehabilitate Venezuela's damaged infrastructure. And it's not just about turning the taps back on, it's about rebuilding a fundamentally broken industry.
And the revenue from that oil was already earmarked.
Highly specifically, it would fund reconstruction, but also, crucially, it would fund reimbursements for past seizures of American assets and compensation for displaced Venezuelans. It turns oil into a political tool for settling old debts.
All of which is possible because the embargo on Venezuelan oil is still in place, giving the U.S. total leverage over who gets to sell it.
Exactly. But here is the massive complication, the one that makes the success of the raid feel so conditional. The sources are very clear that the Maduro-era system is still in place. The entrenched power brokers still control the actual levers of authority.
Right. This is the critical failure point. Capturing the figurehead doesn't dismantle the machine.
Not at all. You have key figures still free and still powerful. The defense minister, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, he still controls the armed forces. A senior political figure, Diosdado Cabello, still holds immense internal security and political influence.
And the Rodriguez siblings, Delcy and Jorge Rodriguez, they control things like oil management and information operations. These are the people who actually run the country day to day.
They are the continuing operational state. And this creates an enormous succession dilemma. They're positioned to take over, but they're also almost certainly implicated in the same trafficking and corruption networks that brought Maduro down.
So their incentive is what? Cooperate with the U.S. and face prosecution, or fight.
Or flee. They could seek protection from Russia or China, taking state secrets with them. Their continued presence creates this massive source of volatility.
And that volatility, it turns out, was planned for. Trump revealed something critical about the pre-planning. The second wave contingency.
Yes, the planners had assumed a second, much larger wave of military action might be necessary. They weren't just prepared for a raid. They were prepared for a full-on fight to secure the entire country if the raid didn't completely paralyze the opposition.
So the initial success of absolute resolve was really only seen internally as step one.
That's right. The fact that U.S. forces remained at a high state of readiness in the region suggests that while Trump might have hoped the second wave wasn't needed, the military command likely viewed it as still very plausible as long as Pedrino Lopez and Cabello were still in play. The raid was over, but the high-stakes political conflict was just beginning.
So wrapping up this deep dive into Operation Absolute Resolve, I think we can synthesize these massive layers of information down into three core takeaways.
First, just the meticulous planning, that unprecedented integration of the CIA, NSA, and NGA, waiting for those trigger conditions to align, and then the sheer overwhelming force of that 150-plus aircraft package launched after that 10:46 p.m. authorization. It really was a study in operational perfection.
And second, the surgical climax. That incredible speed of entry that beat Maduro to his safe room, that illustrative 47-second tempo, and the critical, almost cynical inclusion of embedded FBI personnel to maintain the legal fiction of an arrest, all of it done in just 2 hours and 20 minutes.
And third, the massive geopolitical consequence. The Noriega precedent being invoked immediately, the deeply polarized international opinion, UN condemnation on one side, regional support from leaders like Milei on the other, and the fact that the entire transition now depends on managing this deep state apparatus that was left behind.
The ripple effects here are just profound. I mean, think about Cuba. It is so heavily reliant on Venezuelan oil. If a new U.S.-aligned government cuts those flows, Cuba faces instant intensified economic pressure.
And the strategic signal of this operation,
Mm.
it will be studied everywhere, not just in the region, but by adversaries like Iran. Their security establishment will be analyzing the precise capabilities of U.S. space and cyber command in a real-world scenario. This proves the U.S. is willing to project this kind of power to execute a domestic indictment.
Analysis based on that Noriega precedent, it suggests a really tough road ahead for Venezuela. A prediction of stabilization within maybe 1 to 3 years, but only if it's conditioned on massive international aid and sanctions relief. So chaos first, then a long, slow climb.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. The U.S. assumed a second, much larger wave of military action might be needed to secure the country, not just the target. So given that these powerful figures like Padrino Lopez, who controls the military, and Diosdado Cabello, who controls internal security, given that they remained free and in control of the state machinery, does the immediate cinematic success of absolute resolve just mask a longer, potentially more volatile period of instability?
What is the long game for these remaining power brokers who just watched their leader get snatched in the middle of the night? Will they fight the U.S.-backed transition, or will they leverage their remaining control over the military and the oil to negotiate their own immunity? That is the open question that will dominate the region for years.